Picture this. You're about to make the biggest decision of your career. The stakes are enormous, the timeline is tight, and you can feel anxiety creeping up your spine like ice water. In that moment, would you rather react like most modern leaders, fighting the anxiety and hoping it doesn't show, or respond like Marcus Aurelius, who used anxiety as a navigation system for better decision-making? The greatest misconception about anxiety in leadership is that it's a weakness to be eliminated or a problem to be solved. Most leaders spend enormous energy trying to suppress anxious feelings, hide them from their teams, or push through them with willpower and caffeine. But what if anxiety isn't the enemy of effective leadership? What if it's actually a sophisticated information system that, when properly understood and utilized, can make you a more effective leader than you would be without it? The ancient Stoics understood something about anxiety that modern psychology is just beginning to rediscover. Anxiety is not a malfunction of your mental systems, it's a feature. It's your brain's early warning system alerting you to situations that require careful attention, thorough preparation, or different approaches than what you've used before. The problem isn't the anxiety itself, it's how most people respond to it. Let me share the case study of Dr. Catherine Reynolds, Chief Medical Officer of a large hospital system, who discovered this principle during one of the most challenging periods of her career. Catherine had always been a confident leader, but when she was promoted to oversee the hospital's response to a major public health crisis, she began experiencing levels of anxiety she had never dealt with before. The decisions she needed to make could literally affect thousands of lives, and the uncertainty surrounding the crisis meant that many of her choices had to be made with incomplete information. Catherine's initial response was typical of most leaders facing anxiety. She tried to power through it. She worked longer hours, drank more coffee, and attempted to maintain the same confident demeanor that had served her well in less stressful situations. But the anxiety persisted and actually began affecting her decision-making quality. She found herself becoming reactive rather than strategic, focusing on immediate crises rather than long-term planning, and struggling to maintain the clear thinking that effective leadership requires. The breakthrough came when Catherine attended a leadership development program that introduced her to Stoic principles. Instead of treating anxiety as an enemy to be defeated, she learned to view it as information to be decoded. The Stoic approach taught her that anxiety often signals one of three important messages. You need more information before making a decision. You need to prepare more thoroughly for potential outcomes, or you need to examine whether your current approach aligns with your values and long-term objectives. When Catherine began applying this framework to her anxious feelings, everything changed. Instead of fighting the anxiety, she started investigating what it was trying to tell her. When she felt anxious about a particular decision, she would pause and ask, "What additional information would help me feel more confident about this choice? What potential outcomes haven't I adequately prepared for? How does this decision align with my core values and the hospital's mission?" This shift in approach transformed Catherine's leadership effectiveness. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it became a valuable tool rather than a debilitating obstacle. She began making better decisions because she was paying attention to her internal warning systems rather than overriding them. Her team noticed that she seemed calmer and more thoughtful, even during crisis periods, because she was working with her natural responses rather than fighting against them. The Stoic understanding of anxiety is fundamentally different from both the "just think positive" approach and the "eliminate all stress" approach that dominate most leadership advice. Stoics recognize that anxiety is often a rational response to genuinely challenging situations, and that the goal isn't to eliminate it but to use it wisely. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about managing the anxious thoughts that came with ruling an empire during plague, war, and political upheaval. His approach wasn't to deny these feelings, but to examine them carefully and extract useful information while not being controlled by them. This perspective becomes particularly important when we consider that leadership roles naturally generate anxiety because they involve responsibility for outcomes you can't completely control. No matter how well you plan or how competent you are, leadership always involves uncertainty, competing priorities, and decisions that affect other people's welfare. Anxiety in these contexts isn't a personal failing. It's evidence that you understand the weight of your responsibilities. Consider the difference between two executives facing the same challenge, a major budget reduction that will require difficult personnel decisions. The first executive fights his anxiety about these decisions, tries to maintain confidence he doesn't feel, and makes quick choices to get the uncomfortable process over with. The second executive recognizes her anxiety as a signal that these decisions deserve careful consideration, uses the discomfort as motivation for thorough analysis, and takes the time needed to make choices that align with both business necessities and ethical obligations. The first executive's approach often leads to decisions that create more problems downstream, hasty layoffs that eliminate critical capabilities, across-the-board cuts that don't address root inefficiencies, or communication that damages trust because it's clearly not authentic. The second executive's approach, while initially more uncomfortable, typically leads to more thoughtful solutions that preserve organizational capabilities while meeting financial requirements. The key insight is that anxiety becomes problematic not because of the feeling itself, but because of our resistance to the feeling. When you're fighting anxiety, you're fighting with yourself, which depletes the mental resources you need for clear thinking and effective decision-making. When you're working with anxiety, you're using all available information, both external data and internal responses, to make the best possible choices. This doesn't mean becoming paralyzed by every anxious thought or second-guessing every decision. It means developing what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, the ability to want what actually serves your objectives rather than just what feels comfortable in the moment. Sometimes effective leadership requires making decisions that generate anxiety, and sometimes it requires sitting with uncertainty until more information becomes available. The Stoic approach to anxiety also recognizes an important distinction between productive concern and unproductive worry. Productive concern motivates preparation, drives careful analysis, and encourages consideration of potential problems before they become crises. Unproductive worry involves repetitive thoughts about problems you can't solve, catastrophic thinking about unlikely scenarios, or mental rehearsal of worst-case outcomes without any constructive planning. Learning to distinguish between these two types of anxious thinking is crucial for leadership effectiveness. When you notice anxiety arising, the first question is whether this concern is pointing towards something you can actually influence or prepare for. If the answer is yes, then the anxiety is providing valuable information that can improve your leadership decisions. If the answer is no, then you're dealing with unproductive worry that needs to be redirected rather than indulged. This framework helped Catherine develop what she called anxiety aikido, the ability to use the energy of anxious feelings for constructive purposes rather than being overwhelmed by them. When she felt worried about a decision, she would channel that energy into more thorough research. When she felt uncertain about outcomes, she would use that discomfort to develop better contingency plans. When she felt overwhelmed by responsibilities, she would use those feelings as signals to prioritize more effectively or seek appropriate support. The result was that Catherine became known for her ability to maintain clarity and effectiveness during crisis periods, not because she eliminated anxiety, but because she had learned to work with it skillfully. Her anxiety had become a leadership asset rather than a liability, providing early warning about potential problems and motivation for thorough preparation that served her team and organization well. This transformation from anxiety as obstacle to anxiety as information is available to any leader willing to change their relationship with uncomfortable feelings. It requires practice and patience, but it doesn't require eliminating anxiety or pretending you don't feel it. It requires understanding that effective leadership isn't about feeling confident all the time. It's about making good decisions regardless of how you feel. And sometimes those good decisions are informed by the very feelings that initially seem problematic. The ancient Stoics developed specific practices for managing anxiety that are remarkably relevant to modern leadership challenges. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that you can apply immediately when facing the kinds of pressures that create anxiety in leadership roles. The key is understanding that these practices work with your natural psychological responses rather than against them. The first tool is what Epictetus called the view from above, a technique for gaining perspective when anxiety is narrowing your focus on immediate problems. When you're feeling overwhelmed by current challenges, this practice involves mentally stepping back to see your situation from a broader perspective. How will this issue matter in 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years? How does this challenge fit into the larger context of your organization's mission and your career development? Let me share how Marcus Thompson, CEO of a renewable energy startup, used this technique during a period when his company was facing potential bankruptcy. 3 major investors had withdrawn funding simultaneously. Key employees were leaving for more stable opportunities, and regulatory changes were threatening their core business model. Marcus found himself consumed with anxiety about immediate survival decisions: which employees to lay off, which projects to cancel, and whether to accept a buyout offer that would save the company but eliminate his leadership role. The anxiety was so intense that Marcus couldn't think clearly about any of these decisions. Every option seemed to lead to failure, and the pressure to make quick choices was paralyzing. That's when his business mentor suggested applying the view from above. Instead of focusing on immediate crisis management, Marcus spent an afternoon considering these questions. What would this situation look like from the perspective of someone observing his industry over the next decade? How might current challenges actually be positioning his company for future opportunities that weren't visible during the crisis? This shift in perspective revealed insights that weren't available when Marcus was focused entirely on immediate problems. The regulatory changes that seemed threatening were actually creating opportunities for companies with his technical expertise. The investor withdrawals, while financially painful, were eliminating partnerships that had been constraining the company's strategic flexibility. Even the employee departures were creating space to hire people with skills more aligned with the company's future direction. Armed with this broader perspective, Marcus was able to make decisions based on strategic opportunity rather than crisis management. Instead of accepting the buyout offer, he developed a restructuring plan that positioned the company to capitalize on emerging market opportunities. Instead of arbitrary layoffs, he made strategic personnel changes that improved organizational capabilities while reducing costs. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling his decision-making process. The view from above works because anxiety naturally narrows our focus to immediate threats and problems. While this focus can be useful for handling genuine emergencies, it becomes counterproductive when dealing with complex challenges that require strategic thinking. By deliberately expanding your perspective, you access information and options that aren't visible when you're consumed with immediate concerns. The second Stoic tool is Premeditation of Evils, a practice that sounds negative but actually reduces anxiety by removing the fear of the unknown. This involves deliberately considering what you would do if your worst fears about a situation actually occurred. The goal isn't to expect the worst, but to prepare mentally for various scenarios so that uncertainty doesn't paralyze your decision-making. This practice became crucial for Elena Rodriguez when she was promoted to Chief Operating Officer of a logistics company during a period of significant industry disruption. New technologies were changing customer expectations, competitors were entering their market with innovative approaches, and economic uncertainty was affecting client budgets. Elena found herself constantly anxious about potential threats to the business, which made it difficult to focus on proactive strategic planning. Elena's anxiety was centered on several specific fears: losing major clients to competitors, being unable to adapt quickly enough to technological changes, and having to implement massive layoffs if economic conditions worsened. Instead of trying to suppress these concerns, Elena applied Premeditation of Evils by systematically thinking through what she would actually do if each of these scenarios occurred. For the client loss scenario, Elena developed detailed plans for diversifying the customer base, improving service quality to strengthen existing relationships, and identifying new market segments that might be less vulnerable to competitive pressure. For the technology disruption scenario, she researched specific innovations that could enhance their operations and developed implementation timelines for different budget scenarios. For the economic downturn scenario, she created contingency plans that would preserve core capabilities while reducing costs through efficiency improvements rather than workforce reductions. The remarkable result was that Elena's anxiety decreased significantly once she had clear plans for handling her worst-case scenarios. She discovered that most of her fears were manageable if she prepared properly, and that having contingency plans actually enabled more aggressive strategic moves because she wasn't paralyzed by uncertainty about potential outcomes. More importantly, several of Elena's worst-case preparations turned out to be valuable regardless of whether the feared scenarios materialized. The client diversification efforts strengthened the business even without major client losses. The technology research revealed improvement opportunities that enhanced operations immediately. The efficiency analysis identified cost savings that improved profitability during good times rather than just preserving viability during difficult times. Premeditation of Evils reduces anxiety by transforming vague fears into specific challenges with specific solutions. When you know what you would do if your fears materialized, those fears lose their power to paralyze your thinking or decision-making. The third Stoic tool is present moment awareness, the discipline of focusing your attention on what you can actually control right now rather than being consumed by worry about past mistakes or future uncertainties. This isn't about ignoring the past or future, but about recognizing that effective action always happens in the present moment. This principle was transformative for David Kim when he became division head for a pharmaceutical company that was facing FDA scrutiny over safety concerns with one of their major products. David found himself constantly replaying past decisions that might have contributed to the current situation and worrying about potential regulatory actions that could devastate the division's financial performance. The anxiety about past and future was making it impossible to focus on present-moment decisions that could actually influence outcomes. David applied present-moment awareness by creating what he called action lists, specific things he could do today to address current challenges rather than worry about things he couldn't change or control. When anxiety about past decisions arose, he would acknowledge the feelings but redirect his attention to current choices that could improve the situation. When worry about future regulatory actions consumed his thinking, he would focus on present moment preparations and communications that could influence those outcomes. This practice didn't eliminate David's concerns about past decisions or future consequences, but it prevented those concerns from paralyzing his current effectiveness. By consistently redirecting anxious energy toward present moment action, David was able to lead his team through the regulatory review process more effectively than if he had been consumed with regret or worry. The fourth Stoic tool is Dichotomy of Control Analysis, systematically separating factors you can influence from those you cannot, and focusing your mental energy entirely on the controllable factors. This is perhaps the most powerful anxiety management tool because most leadership anxiety comes from feeling responsible for outcomes you can't actually control. This analysis involves creating two lists when facing anxiety-provoking situations: factors within your control and factors outside your control. You then focus all your attention and energy on the first list while accepting the second list as external circumstances that will unfold according to forces beyond your influence. These four Stoic tools work together to create what I call calm clarity, the ability to think clearly and make effective decisions even when experiencing anxiety. The tools don't eliminate anxious feelings, but they prevent those feelings from compromising your leadership effectiveness. You learn to use anxiety as information while not being controlled by it, to prepare for challenges while not being paralyzed by them, and to focus on constructive action while not being consumed by factors beyond your control. The key to mastering these tools is regular practice during lower stress situations so they're available when you face high-stakes challenges. Like any other leadership skill, these capabilities develop through consistent application rather than just intellectual understanding. The leaders who become most skilled at managing anxiety are those who practice these techniques regularly rather than waiting until crisis situations to apply them. To understand how Stoic anxiety management techniques work in real-world leadership situations, let's examine 3 detailed case studies of leaders who transformed their relationship with anxiety from liability to strategic advantage. These aren't theoretical examples. They represent the kinds of high-pressure situations that every leader faces, and they demonstrate how ancient principles can create modern leadership effectiveness. 1. The Crisis Communication Challenge. Jennifer Park became communications director for a major technology company just 3 months before a data breach affected millions of customer accounts. As news of the breach broke, Jennifer found herself at the center of a media firestorm that threatened both her career and the company's reputation. The anxiety was overwhelming. Every statement could be scrutinized. Every decision could have legal implications, and the entire company was looking to her for leadership during the most challenging period in its history. Jennifer's initial response was typical of leaders facing intense public scrutiny. She tried to control every aspect of the message, spent sleepless nights crafting perfect statements, and became increasingly reactive to media criticism and social media commentary. The anxiety was consuming so much mental energy that she was making poor strategic decisions, becoming defensive with journalists, and losing the clarity needed for effective crisis communication. The transformation began when Jennifer applied the Stoic principle of Dichotomy of Control Analysis to her situation. She created 2 lists: factors she could control versus factors she couldn't control. On the controllable side were her communication strategy, her team's preparation and training, the accuracy and transparency of information they provided, and their responsiveness to legitimate customer concerns. On the uncontrollable side were media coverage decisions, social media reactions, competitor actions, and the ultimate impact on stock price or customer loyalty. This analysis revealed something important. Jennifer had been spending most of her mental energy worrying about uncontrollable factors while neglecting areas where she could actually influence outcomes. Once she redirected her focus entirely to controllable factors, her effectiveness improved dramatically. Instead of monitoring media coverage obsessively, she focused on developing clear, accurate communication materials. Instead of reacting to every criticism, she concentrated on building relationships with key journalists and stakeholders. Jennifer also applied premeditation of evils by systematically planning for various worst-case scenarios: congressional hearings, class action lawsuits, major customer defections, and executive leadership changes. Instead of being paralyzed by these possibilities, she developed specific communication strategies for each scenario. This preparation reduced her anxiety significantly because she knew exactly how she would handle various challenges if they arose. The view from above helped Jennifer maintain perspective during the most intense criticism. Instead of seeing the crisis as a career-ending disaster, she began to view it as an opportunity to demonstrate leadership capabilities that would serve her throughout her career. This perspective shift enabled her to approach media interactions with confidence rather than defensiveness, which improved both the quality of coverage and her own effectiveness. 6 months after the crisis began, Jennifer's handling of the situation was being studied as a model for effective crisis communication. The company's reputation had been preserved, customer trust had been rebuilt, and Jennifer had been promoted to senior vice president. The anxiety that initially seemed like her greatest obstacle had become the foundation for her most significant career achievement. 2. The merger integration dilemma. Michael Torres was appointed to lead the integration of 2 competing healthcare systems that had agreed to merge in response to industry pressures. Both organizations had strong cultures, different operational approaches, and employees who were anxious about job security and career prospects. Michael's role was to create a unified organization that captured synergies from the merger while preserving the strengths of both systems. The anxiety challenges were immense. Every decision about organizational structure affected real people's livelihoods. Cultural differences between the organizations created constant friction that required careful navigation. Board members from both organizations had different priorities and expectations that seemed impossible to reconcile. Michael found himself losing sleep, second-guessing decisions, and becoming increasingly overwhelmed by the complexity of the integration process. Michael's breakthrough came through applying present-moment awareness to break down the overwhelming integration project into manageable daily actions. Instead of trying to solve every challenge simultaneously, he focused each day on specific decisions that could be made with available information. When anxiety about long-term outcomes threatened to paralyze his thinking, he would redirect his attention to immediate actions that could move the integration forward. This approach revealed that many of his anxieties were about problems that might never materialize or decisions that didn't need to be made immediately. By focusing on present-moment priorities, Michael was able to make steady progress without being overwhelmed by the entire scope of the integration challenge. Michael also used the view from above to maintain perspective during particularly difficult periods. Instead of seeing conflicts between the organizations as threats to the merger's success, he began to view them as opportunities to build stronger long-term relationships by addressing underlying concerns directly. This shift enabled him to approach disagreements with curiosity rather than defensiveness, which led to more creative solutions that served both organizations' interests. The Premeditation of Evils technique helped Michael prepare for various integration challenges, key employee departures, regulatory complications, financial shortfalls, and cultural conflicts that could derail the process. By developing specific contingency plans for these scenarios, Michael reduced his anxiety about uncertainty while improving his actual preparedness for potential problems. 18 months after beginning the integration process, the merged organization was performing better than either organization had individually. Employee satisfaction was higher than pre-merger levels, financial performance exceeded projections, and the integration was being studied as a model for successful healthcare mergers. Michael's ability to manage his own anxiety had enabled him to lead others through their anxiety about organizational change. 3. The Innovation Leadership Challenge. Dr. Patricia Williams became Chief Innovation Officer for a traditional manufacturing company that needed to develop new technology capabilities to remain competitive. The company's board was demanding rapid innovation, but the organizational culture was risk-averse and resistant to change. Patricia faced the challenge of driving innovation while managing stakeholders who had conflicting expectations about timelines, resource allocation, and acceptable levels of risk. The anxiety was particularly intense because innovation inherently involves uncertainty and potential failure. Patricia was responsible for outcomes she couldn't guarantee, using approaches that hadn't been tested in her industry, with resources that were limited and timeline expectations that were aggressive. Every project could succeed or fail, and failures would be highly visible to senior leadership and board members. Patricia's transformation began with reframing anxiety as innovation intelligence. Instead of viewing her concerns about specific projects as signs of weakness or lack of confidence, she began to see them as valuable information about where additional research, preparation, or risk mitigation was needed. Anxiety about a particular technology approach would motivate more thorough testing. Worry about timeline feasibility would drive more realistic project planning. Concern about stakeholder reactions would encourage better communication and expectation management. She applied Dichotomy of Control Analysis to innovation challenges by distinguishing between factors that could be influenced through good management, research quality, team preparation, stakeholder communication, resource allocation, and factors that were inherently uncertain, market reception, competitive responses, technological feasibility, regulatory changes. This analysis helped Patricia focus her energy on maximizing the likelihood of success rather than worrying about factors beyond her control. The view from above helped Patricia maintain perspective during inevitable setbacks and failures. Instead of seeing failed projects as career threats, she began to view them as valuable learning experiences that positioned the company for future success. This perspective enabled her to communicate about failures honestly and constructively rather than defensively, which built trust with stakeholders and improved future project outcomes. Premeditation of Evils was particularly valuable for innovation leadership because it helped Patricia prepare for various failure scenarios. Projects that exceeded budgets, technologies that didn't work as expected, competitive developments that made their approaches obsolete, and stakeholder reactions to disappointing results. By planning specific responses to these challenges, Patricia reduced her anxiety about failure while improving her actual ability to recover quickly from setbacks. After 3 years in her role, Patricia had successfully launched several breakthrough products that positioned the company as an innovation leader in their industry. More importantly, she had built an organizational culture that embraced intelligent risk-taking and learned effectively from both successes and failures. The anxiety that initially seemed like the greatest obstacle to innovation leadership had become the foundation for better preparation, more thoughtful risk management, and more effective stakeholder communication. These case studies demonstrate that the Stoic approach to anxiety management isn't about eliminating uncomfortable feelings or pretending you don't experience pressure. It's about developing the skills to extract useful information from anxiety while not being controlled by it, to use discomfort as motivation for better preparation while not being paralyzed by uncertainty, and to maintain clarity and effectiveness regardless of your internal emotional state. The leaders in these case studies didn't become anxiety-free, they became anxiety-skilled. They learned to work with their natural psychological responses rather than against them, which enabled them to make better decisions, communicate more effectively, and achieve better outcomes than would have been possible if they had either suppressed their anxiety or been overwhelmed by it. The ultimate goal of applying Stoic principles to leadership anxiety isn't just managing crisis situations more effectively. It's building the kind of long-term resilience and calm confidence that enables you to handle whatever challenges arise throughout your leadership career. This requires developing what I call anti-fragile leadership, the capacity to become stronger and more capable through encountering and overcoming difficult situations rather than just surviving them. The foundation of anti-fragile leadership rests on understanding that anxiety and challenge are not obstacles to leadership development, they're essential components of it. Just as physical strength develops through resistance training, leadership capabilities develop through successfully navigating situations that test your decision-making, communication, and problem-solving abilities under pressure. The key is learning to use these challenges as development opportunities rather than just enduring them. This principle transformed the career trajectory of Carlos Rivera when he became regional manager for a retail chain during the most challenging period in the industry's history. Online competition was devastating traditional retail, consumer preferences were changing rapidly, and economic uncertainty was affecting purchasing behavior. Instead of viewing these challenges as threats to his success, Carlos began to see them as opportunities to develop capabilities that would serve him throughout his career regardless of what industry changes occurred. Carlos applied what he called challenge reframing, the practice of viewing difficult situations as training programs rather than obstacles to overcome. When facing store closures, instead of just minimizing damage, he focused on learning everything possible about efficient transition management, employee communication during difficult changes, and stakeholder relationship preservation under pressure. When dealing with budget constraints, instead of just cutting costs, he used the situation to develop expertise in resource optimization, creative problem-solving, and performance improvement with limited resources. This reframing completely changed Carlos's relationship with leadership anxiety. Instead of seeing anxious feelings as signs that something was wrong, he began to view them as indicators that he was encountering situations that could expand his capabilities. Anxiety about making difficult personnel decisions motivated him to develop better hiring, training, and performance management systems. Worry about meeting financial targets drove him to become expert at operational efficiency and customer satisfaction improvement. The result was that Carlos not only successfully managed his region through the industry crisis but emerged with leadership capabilities that positioned him for promotion to corporate leadership roles. The challenges that derailed many of his peers became the foundation for his advancement because he had learned to extract maximum learning value from every difficult situation. Building long-term resilience also requires what the Stoics called philosophical inoculation, regularly exposing yourself to small challenges and discomforts so that you build tolerance for larger difficulties when they arise. This isn't about seeking out unnecessary stress, but about not avoiding reasonable challenges that could develop your capabilities. This principle guided Sandra Chen's approach when she became Chief Technology Officer for a financial services company that was struggling to modernize legacy systems while maintaining operational stability. Instead of avoiding potentially difficult projects or controversial decisions, Sandra deliberately chose assignments that would stretch her capabilities and expose her to new types of leadership challenges. When the opportunity arose to lead a cross-functional team implementing blockchain technology, Sandra volunteered despite having limited experience with the technology and knowing that the project would be highly scrutinized by senior leadership. When a major vendor relationship needed to be renegotiated, Sandra took responsibility even though confrontational negotiations weren't her natural strength. When budget presentations to the board required defending technology investments that were difficult to quantify, Sandra embraced these communications challenges rather than delegating them. Each of these deliberately chosen challenges created anxiety and discomfort, but Sandra approached them as leadership development opportunities rather than just job requirements. She used the anxiety as motivation for thorough preparation, careful stakeholder analysis, and creative problem-solving. More importantly, she reflected on each experience to extract lessons that could be applied to future challenges. Over 5 years, Sandra developed a reputation as a leader who could handle any technology challenge or organizational change. The cumulative effect of deliberately engaging with difficult situations had built capabilities that enabled her to approach new challenges with confidence rather than anxiety. She had become anti-fragile, stronger and more capable because of the difficulties she had encountered rather than despite them. The development of calm confidence also requires understanding the difference between confidence based on control and confidence based on competence. Most leaders try to build confidence by controlling outcomes, but this approach is inherently fragile because leadership always involves factors beyond your control. Stoic confidence is based on knowing that you can handle whatever situations arise, regardless of whether you can control the outcomes. This distinction was crucial for Dr. Rachel Morgan when she became medical director for a trauma center during a period of significant healthcare industry changes. Rachel had built her early career confidence on being able to control medical outcomes through expertise and preparation. But leadership roles involve political factors, economic constraints, and regulatory requirements that can't be controlled through medical knowledge alone. The transition was initially frustrating and anxiety-provoking because Rachel's traditional confidence-building strategies weren't applicable to her new challenges. She couldn't control board decisions, insurance reimbursement rates, or regulatory changes, but these factors significantly affected her ability to provide optimal patient care. Rachel's breakthrough came through developing what she called process confidence in her ability to analyze situations thoroughly, make decisions based on best available information, adapt to changing circumstances, and learn from outcomes regardless of whether they matched her initial plans. Instead of basing confidence on controlling results, she built confidence on her decision-making process. This shift enabled Rachel to approach leadership challenges with calm effectiveness even when outcomes were uncertain. She could advocate confidently for resources and policy changes because she trusted her analysis, even when she couldn't guarantee that her recommendations would be implemented. She could communicate with staff and patients honestly about challenges because she was confident in the organization's ability to adapt to whatever circumstances arose. The final element of building long-term resilience involves creating what I call wisdom accumulation systems, deliberate practices for extracting and retaining lessons from every leadership experience so that your capabilities compound over time rather than just cycling through similar challenges repeatedly. This requires regular reflection on leadership experiences to identify patterns, successful strategies, and areas for improvement. It means documenting insights that emerge from difficult situations so you can apply them to future challenges. Most importantly, it involves sharing lessons learned with other leaders so that your experience contributes to collective wisdom rather than just individual development. These wisdom accumulation practices create a positive feedback loop where each challenge you successfully navigate makes you better prepared for future challenges, which reduces anxiety about uncertainty because you trust your ability to learn and adapt regardless of what situations arise. The leaders who develop this kind of anti-fragile resilience become organizational assets during periods of change and uncertainty. They're the people others turn to when facing unfamiliar challenges because they've demonstrated the ability to learn quickly, adapt effectively, and maintain clarity under pressure. They don't necessarily have more experience with every specific situation, but they have more experience with the process of learning and adapting, which is ultimately more valuable than specific expertise in rapidly changing environments. Building this capability requires patience because it develops gradually through cumulative experience rather than dramatic breakthroughs. But the investment pays compound returns throughout your leadership career because each challenge becomes easier to handle when you've developed strong processes for analyzing situations, making decisions under uncertainty, and learning from outcomes. The ancient Stoics understood that true strength comes not from avoiding difficulties but from developing the character and capabilities to handle whatever difficulties arise. In leadership contexts, this translates to building the kind of calm confidence and resilient effectiveness that enables you to serve others well regardless of external circumstances or internal emotional states. The relationship between anxiety and leadership effectiveness doesn't have to be adversarial. When you understand anxiety as information rather than interference, when you develop Stoic tools for working with rather than against your natural psychological responses, and when you use challenges as opportunities to build anti-fragile capabilities, anxiety transforms from a leadership liability into a strategic advantage. The case studies we've explored demonstrate that the most effective leaders aren't those who never experience anxiety. They're those who have learned to extract valuable information from anxious feelings while not being controlled by them. Dr. Catherine Reynolds discovered that anxiety could guide better decision-making when properly interpreted. Jennifer Park used crisis-related anxiety as motivation for more thorough preparation and clearer communication. Michael Torres transformed merger-related stress into opportunities for building stronger organizational relationships. Dr. Patricia Williams leveraged innovation anxiety as intelligence about where additional preparation was needed. These leaders didn't eliminate anxiety from their leadership experience. They developed anxiety literacy that enabled them to use uncomfortable feelings as navigation systems for better leadership choices. They learned to distinguish between productive concern that motivates preparation and unproductive worry that drains mental resources. Most importantly, they built the kind of calm confidence that comes from trusting your ability to handle whatever challenges arise rather than trying to control outcomes you can't actually influence. The Stoic toolkit we've discussed provides practical techniques for this transformation. The view from above for maintaining perspective during overwhelming situations. Premeditation of Evils for reducing anxiety about uncertainty through systematic preparation. Present moment awareness for focusing energy on controllable factors rather than being consumed by past regrets or future worries, and Dichotomy of Control Analysis for distinguishing between factors you can influence and those you must accept as external circumstances. But understanding these techniques intellectually is different from developing the capability to apply them effectively under pressure. Like any other leadership skill, anxiety management requires regular practice during lower stress situations so the capabilities are available when you face high-stakes challenges. The leaders who become most skilled at this work are those who practice these techniques consistently rather than waiting until crisis situations to experiment with them. The practical application begins with changing your fundamental relationship with anxiety from enemy to information source. The next time you notice anxious feelings about a leadership challenge, instead of trying to suppress or ignore them, pause and investigate what they might be telling you. Do you need more information before making a decision? Would additional preparation improve your confidence and effectiveness? Are you approaching the situation in alignment with your values and long-term objectives? Start building your Stoic anxiety management capabilities by choosing one technique that resonates most with your current challenges. Perhaps it's applying the view from above when you feel overwhelmed by immediate pressures. Maybe it's using Premeditation of Evils to reduce uncertainty anxiety through systematic contingency planning. Or it could be practicing present moment awareness to focus your energy on current actions rather than past mistakes or future concerns. Remember that the goal isn't to become an anxiety-free leader. Such a person would actually be less effective because they would be ignoring valuable information about situations that deserve careful attention. The goal is to become an anxiety-skilled leader who can extract useful intelligence from uncomfortable feelings while maintaining the clarity and effectiveness needed to serve others well. The development of these capabilities creates what I call confident vulnerability. The ability to acknowledge uncertainty and discomfort honestly while maintaining the strength and clarity needed for effective leadership. This isn't about projecting false confidence or pretending you don't experience pressure. It's about developing genuine confidence in your ability to handle whatever challenges arise, regardless of how you feel about them initially. The ancient Stoics understood that leadership is fundamentally about character. Your ability to make good decisions and serve others well regardless of external circumstances or internal emotional states. Character develops through practice, and much of that practice involves learning to respond wisely to anxiety-provoking situations rather than being overwhelmed or controlled by them. In our current leadership environment, where change happens rapidly and stakes often feel higher than ever, the leaders who thrive will be those who can maintain clarity under pressure, extract wisdom from discomfort, and use challenges as opportunities for development rather than just obstacles to overcome. These capabilities aren't natural talents that some people have and others don't. They're skills that develop through deliberate practice and consistent application of proven principles. The question isn't whether you'll face anxiety-provoking situations as a leader. You will. The question is whether you'll approach them with the tools and perspective to use them for growth and effectiveness, or whether you'll be limited by trying to avoid or suppress the very feelings that could guide you toward better leadership choices. When you've developed the ability to work skillfully with anxiety rather than against it, you've gained access to a form of leadership strength that serves you throughout your career regardless of what specific challenges arise or how circumstances change. You've learned to trust your ability to adapt and learn, which is ultimately more valuable than confidence in any specific strategy or approach. If this exploration of Stoic anxiety management for leaders has provided value for your leadership development, I encourage you to subscribe for more insights that bridge ancient wisdom with modern leadership challenges. The principles we've discussed are part of a larger framework for developing the kind of character and capabilities that enable leaders to serve others effectively regardless of external pressures or internal challenges. Until next time, remember that anxiety isn't your enemy as a leader. It's information that, when properly understood and utilized, can guide you toward more thoughtful decisions, better preparation, and more effective service to the people and purposes you're responsible for. The ancient Stoics proved that true leadership strength comes not from eliminating difficulty but from developing the wisdom and character to handle whatever difficulties arise with clarity, courage, and commitment to the greater good.